Hey, I'm Nathan, and before we start, I want you to think about something you have never once thought about today. You woke up on a floor. You drove over a road. You walked into a building. Every single one of those things is sitting on dirt that somebody swore was good enough, on a piece of paper somebody signed. You have never met that person. You never will, and you trusted them with your whole life anyway. The story I'm telling you today is about a man who spent 22 years learning to read dirt the way you read a face. He knew what a wall of soil sounds like right before it decides to kill you. He was standing in a trench at Fort Leonard Wood, 4 feet down in Missouri clay, when a sheriff's deputy called him about his 12-year-old son. And what that deputy said next, and then what that deputy did next, is the reason this story exists at all. Here's the part I actually want you to keep. When somebody gets hurt, there is always a second injury, and it happens about 90 seconds later, and nobody in the room notices it. It's the moment somebody decides what to say happened. That version goes in a chart, and then it goes in a report, and then it becomes the truth, and it outlives everybody who was in the room. This man understood that better than anyone, because that's exactly how you bury a body in his line of work. You don't hide it. You just write down that it isn't there. Let's get into it. The trench was 4.5 feet deep, and Garrison Vestal would not let a single soldier put a boot in it. It was the 3rd week of August at Fort Leonard Wood, the kind of Missouri afternoon where the air had weight to it, and Sergeant First Class Garrison Vestal was standing at the lip of a survivability position with his hands in his pockets, which is what he did when he was thinking, and looking at a wall of soil the way other men look at weather. "Sergeant, it's 4 feet," said a young specialist named Tull, who had a shovel and an opinion. "The reg says 5. "The reg says 5, Garrison agreed. He was 43, built like a fence post that had been driven in and left there, with a sunburn line across his forehead from a helmet and gray coming in over his ears. "The reg is a floor, not a promise. Come here, put your hand on that." The specialist crouched and pressed his palm flat to the trench wall. "Feel the cool?" "Yeah, that's water. Yesterday it was warm to the touch. That means it's moved. And when it moves, it gets heavy, and heavy wants to be flat." Garrison pointed at the spoil pile, the mound of dugout earth sitting maybe 18 inches from the edge. "And that thing is a thumb pressing on the wall. Move it back 4 feet. Get the hydraulic shores in. Then we'll talk about who goes down there." He said it without heat. He almost never said anything with heat. Men had been trying for 2 decades to make Garrison Vestal raise his voice, and they had a poor record. He was a 12N, horizontal construction engineer, which is the Army's way of saying the man who makes the ground into whatever the mission needs it to be. Roads, berms, ditches, airfield matting. 22 years of it, 6 of them somewhere hot enough that men had learned to sleep sitting up. In the civilian world, he owned a 4-truck outfit called Vestal Earthworks out of Kildare, Missouri, and he dug drainage and set septic and shored other people's holes, and he had a reputation in Tallow County for being the contractor who would walk off a job rather than let a kid go down into something that hadn't been benched. His father, Emery Vestal, had drilled water wells for 40 years and died with hands that would not fully open. His father had taught him the only sentence that mattered. You cannot argue with the ground. You can only listen to it early or late. Garrison's phone went off at 3:41 in the afternoon. He almost didn't take it. Range control had them on a hard timeline, and the number on the screen was a 417 area code he half recognized. But there was something about the timing. His boy's school had started back on Monday that made his thumb move before his brain caught up. Vestal. "Sir, this is Deputy Walt Kroom with the Tallow County Sheriff's Office. Am I speaking with Garrison Vestal, father of Orrin Vestal?" The world got very quiet and very wide. "You are, sir." A pause, and in that pause Garrison heard the deputy's breathing change, and he knew, the way you know when a wall goes cool. "Your son's at the hospital. He's alive. He's at Mercy in Springfield. They airlifted him out of Kildare about 2 hours ago." Garrison climbed out of the trench. He did it without thinking about it, one hand on the ladder rail, and stood on the flat ground where he could hear. "What happened to my son?" "Sir, I'm not—" The deputy stopped. "Start it again. I'm going to be straight with you, and then I'm going to have to be careful, because I'm on a recorded line, and I'd like to keep my job through Friday. Your son has orbital fractures, both sides. He has a broken forearm, and a broken wrist, and a mandible fracture. He has bruising on his back and his ribs that is, sir, it's patterned. Let's just say you don't want to see the photos. There is a particular thing that happens to a man's body when he hears something like that. His hearing goes narrow. His hands stop being his. Garrison Vestal felt all of it arrive, and he stood there and let it go through him, and then he put it somewhere, because he had learned that panic is a shovel that digs in the wrong direction. Who? He said. Sir. Deputy. Who? Your wife's boyfriend did it. Deputy Kroom said it fast, like a man stepping off a high place. Drake Stovall. It happened at the house on Dovey Creek Road. And then he went quiet. Garrison stood in the sun and listened to a young man on the other end of a phone line, 4 hours away, making the biggest decision of his life. Deputy? There's a report already written, Kroom said. It was written before I got there. It says your son fell from a hayloft ladder in the equipment barn. The stepmother, the mother, she gave that statement at the scene, and she gave it again at the hospital, and it's in the chart. And I have a shift sergeant who told me on the radio to keep it simple, and I'd like you to understand what I'm saying to you without me having to say it. Say it anyway. Nobody is coming for him. The deputy's voice cracked down the middle and came back. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. The prosecutor won't touch a case where the only adult witness gave the injury a story. Drake Stovall's brother is Hoyle Stovall, and Hoyle Stovall is the presiding commissioner of this county, and he signs the checks for my department's fuel, and my department's cars, and my department's raises. I've been on 8 months. I'm 29 years old. I am telling you the truth about myself. I do not have the standing to fight this from inside. Garrison closed his eyes. Out on the lane, a dozer was backing up, and the beeper went on and on. My shift ends in an hour, Deputy Kroom said. Okay, I'm leaving his address on your truck. It's the gray F-250 with the Vestal Earthworks door magnet, parked at your shop on Route P. It'll be under the wiper. It'll be on a piece of paper with nothing else on it. He breathed. Nobody else is going to do this right, except you. There was a long silence on the line, the kind you could have laid a level across. Deputy Kroom, Garrison said. Are you telling me to go kill a man? I'm telling you where he lives, sir, Kroom said. What you do with an address is between you and God, and I'm gonna go be a person who was never on this phone call. The line went dead. Garrison Vestal stood in the middle of a training area at the United States Army Engineer School with the sun coming down on the back of his neck and his son's face, the last one he had seen, on a video call 11 days ago, the boy grinning with a chipped front tooth because he'd tried to skateboard down the loading ramp, and he understood, with total clarity, that a man had taken that face apart with his hands. He put the phone in his pocket. He walked back to the trench. Specialist Tull, he said, move the spoil pile. Set your shores. Nobody goes down until I sign it off. Roger, Sergeant. You okay? No, Garrison said, and went to find his company commander to sign an emergency leave form. The drive home took 4 hours and 11 minutes, and Garrison Vestal spent every one of them thinking about how his life had come apart, because he had learned a long time ago that a man who does not know how the hole got dug will fall in it twice. He had met Tara Hargis at a fire department barbecue in Kildare when he was 26, and she was 22, and she had laughed at a joke he hadn't meant to be funny, and that had felt like winning something. Her father, Carl Hargis, had run a road grader for the Tallow County Road District for 31 years, and Carl had liked Garrison immediately and had never stopped, which would matter later in ways nobody could have predicted. They were married the next spring. Orrin came 4 years after that, in a February ice storm, and they'd had to run the generator for the incubator lamp in the shop for 8 days, and Garrison had held the boy against his chest inside his coat and thought, okay, this is the thing. It was good for a long time. It was good in the way that real things are good, which includes being boring, and then it wasn't. The unraveling had 100 small causes and one big one, and the big one was that Garrison Vestal was gone. He was gone 2 weeks a summer for annual training, and he was gone 1 weekend a month, and in 2019 he was gone for 11 months to a place where he built roads for other people's convoys. He came back and his son was 3 inches taller, and his wife had learned to run everything alone and had discovered that she was extremely good at it and extremely angry about having had to be. They didn't fight, which was the problem. They got polite. Politeness in a marriage is what a hairline crack is in a foundation wall. It isn't the damage, it's the damage. Announcing itself. She asked him to leave in March of last year. He did, because she asked, and because Oren was in the house, and because he could not think of an argument that was worth making in front of a boy. He moved into the apartment over the shop on Route P with a hot plate and a good mattress and a picture of his son at a survey monument. They shared custody informally, which is a word lawyers use for badly. Oren was with his mother on Dovey Creek Road most nights. Garrison had him Thursdays, and every other weekend, and every day of annual training he did not have him at all. Drake Stovall came in through the front door of that gap like he'd been given a key. Drake was 38 and had the specific American handsomeness of a man who has been forgiven a great deal. Big shoulders, big laugh, a gold Stovall Foundation and drainage logo on the door of a 2-year-old truck. He sponsored the high school baseball team, and he showed up with a skid steer when somebody's culvert washed out, and he did not send them a bill. And people in Tallow County would tell you Drake Stovall was the best thing in it. The rest of it was quieter. Drake's company had the county's drainage improvement contract, 3 years running, low bidder every time by an amount that was always just believable. His older brother Hoyle sat as presiding commissioner and abstained from the vote with a great show of ethics, and then went to lunch. The county engineer, a soft, tired man named Cy Kendrick, signed off on every project with the enthusiasm of a man signing a birthday card for a coworker he doesn't like. And in October of 2021, a 44-year-old pipelayer named Judd Purcell had gone down into a 9-foot Stovall trench on a Saturday, and the wall had come in on him, and he had died under about 3,000 pounds of Tallow County soil while his crew dug with their hands. The finding was, employee entered an unshored excavation contrary to direct instruction. Signed by the foreman. Case closed in 11 weeks. Reva Purcell got a settlement and a folded flag of an entirely different kind, a laminated copy of a report that said her husband had killed himself by being stupid. Garrison had read about it in the Tallow County Ledger and had said out loud, alone in his truck, "That is not how a man ends up in a trench on a Saturday." And then he'd done what everybody does with a thought like that, which is nothing. He thought about that a lot on the drive. Somewhere around Lebanon it started raining, hard, the kind of August rain that comes sideways and turns every ditch in the Ozarks into a live thing. Garrison drove 73 and did not pass anyone and did not get past, and he thought about the sentence the deputy had said. There's a report already written. Not a lie told, a report. Written. There is an enormous difference, and only certain people know it. In Garrison's trade, you did not win an argument about whether a subgrade was compacted. You won it by owning the piece of paper that said so. The paper outranked the ground. It always had. He had watched inspectors take a report over their own eyes 100 times, because the report is what you can hold up in a room, and your eyes are just your eyes. Somebody had gotten to his son, and then gotten to the paper. At 9:20 that night, he pulled into the parking garage at Mercy Hospital in Springfield in a truck that smelled like clay and diesel, and he sat for 10 seconds with his hands on the wheel, and then he went in. The pediatric trauma unit at Mercy is on the 4th floor, and it is a very quiet place, which is the worst thing about it. A charge nurse named Dixie Talcott met him at the desk and looked at his uniform and his face and made a decision about him in about a second and a half. "You're Oren's dad." "Yes, ma'am." "He's sedated. He'll be out till morning. Dr. Kane's off at 11. I'll get her to you before that." She hesitated. "Mr. Vestal, before you go in there, I want to say something to you, and I'm going to say it in the hallway where there's no camera." "Okay." "I've been doing this 19 years. Dixie Talcott's chin was doing something complicated. Kids fall off ladders. I have seen 400 kids fall off ladders. That is not what I have in that room. Tell me what's in that room." "A boy with defensive fractures in both forearms," she said. "That's what your arms do when they come up. And bruising across his back in stripes. about an inch and a half apart. Ladders don't do stripes, and when the flight crew brought him in, he was saying a sentence over and over, and it wasn't. Mom. And it wasn't. Ow. What was it? She looked at him. He kept saying, I'll say I fell. I'll say I fell. Garrison Vestal put his hand flat on the wall of that hallway, the way a man does on a trench wall, to feel what's moving. Ma'am, he said, did you write that down? She blinked. Whatever she had braced for, it hadn't been that. Did you chart it, in quotes, with a time on it? Yes, I did. It's in my nursing note. Then you already did more for my son than the sheriff's office of Tallow County, Garrison said. Thank you. I'd like to see him now. Orrin Vestal was 12 years old and weighed 91 pounds, and there was not a part of his face that was the shape it was supposed to be. Garrison stood at the foot of the bed for a long time. Then he sat down in the vinyl chair and put his hand around his son's fingers, the ones that came out past the cast, and he did not cry, because he had discovered somewhere around Marshfield that he was not going to get to. At 11:40 he went out to the parking garage and sat in his truck and let himself have 4 minutes. Then he drove 90 minutes home to Kildare and pulled into the yard at Vestal Earthworks at 1:20 in the morning, and his headlights swept across the gray F-250 with the door magnet, and there was a white rectangle of paper under the wiper blade, soft and curled from the rain. He got out and took it. Handwritten, in ballpoint, pressed hard. 1140 Dovey Creek Road, green metal gate. Dogs are in the barn at night. Nothing else. No name. Garrison Vestal stood in his own gravel lot at 1:30 in the morning, with the rain quitting and the crickets coming back up, and he read the address of the man who had done that to his son. He went inside the shop. He turned on one light. He took a 36-inch pry bar off the wall rack, a good one, forged, that he'd had since he was 25, and he stood there holding it and feeling the honest weight of it in his hand, and he thought about how much of the human body is basically drywall. Then he got in the truck. It is 11 minutes from the shop on Route P to 1140 Dovey Creek Road. He killed the headlights at the top of the rise and coasted down, and pulled onto the shoulder about 200 yards short, in the dark, under a hedgerow, and shut it off, and sat. The house was a big new build, with stone on the front and a porch light burning, the green gate, the barn out back with the dogs in it, one window lit upstairs. He sat there for 40 minutes. He was not, in those 40 minutes, arguing with himself about whether Drake Stovall deserved it. That question was settled, and it stayed settled. He was doing something else, something that was very old in him. He was surveying. Because in the yard, lit by a security light on a pole, was Drake Stovall's equipment, a skid steer, a stack of pipe, a trailer, and behind the trailer, sitting on cribbing, an aluminum trench box, a shoring box, the kind you drop into an excavation so the walls can't come in on the men. Garrison Vestal looked at it for a long time. It was clean. It was immaculate. Powder had not been knocked off it. There was no clay dried in the strut collars. The lifting lugs weren't galled. It had been bought, and it had sat in a yard, and it had been photographed, probably, for a safety file. That trench box had never been in the ground in its life. And Garrison thought about Judd Purcell, who had died in a 9-foot hole in October of 2021, and about a report that said Judd Purcell had gone down there against instruction. Something in him rotated. It was not that his rage went away. It was that it found a bigger target. If he went through that green gate tonight with a pry bar, here is what would happen, and he could see all of it, laid out like a grade stake line. He would put Drake Stovall in a hospital or a hole. He would be arrested inside of 6 hours because his truck was on 3 trail cameras between here and Route P. He would be charged by a prosecutor who worked in a building Hoyle Stovall's budget paid for. Tara would be the state's witness, and the story of what happened to Orrin Vestal would be filed, forever, under. Father snapped, mentally ill from deployment, took the law into his own hands. His son's broken face would become the excuse for his father's crime. The hayloft ladder would stand for 100 years. Drake Stovall would go to the funeral. Drake Stovall would carry a casket. Drake Stovall would put a skid steer on somebody's washed-out culvert and not send a bill. And the ground under half of Tallow County would stay exactly the way he left it. Garrison Vestal sat in the dark and did the hardest arithmetic of his life, which was not. Can I? But. What does it cost my son? Then he started the truck and drove home. He said one sentence out loud on the way, to nobody, in the flat voice of a man reading a number off a survey rod. He doesn't get to see Monday. He did not mean the man's heart. He meant the whole thing. The trucks, the contracts, the brother, the porch light, the version of the world where Drake Stovall was the best thing in Tallow County. Garrison had 11 days of emergency leave, and a lifetime of knowing exactly how much weight a lie can hold before it comes in on top of somebody. At 6:15 the next morning, there was a sheriff's cruiser in his gravel lot with the engine off. Deputy Walt Kroom got out of it in civilian clothes, jeans and a Cardinals cap, holding 2 gas station coffees like a peace offering, and he looked like a man who had not slept and had decided he was never going to again. "You didn't go," he said. "I went," Garrison said. "I sat. I came home." Kroom's shoulders came down about an inch. Okay. He handed over a coffee. "I need you to know I've been sick since I made that call." "Which part?" "All of it. Both directions." The deputy leaned on the fender. "I've got a mother on dialysis and a job I need, and I told a father where a man sleeps, and I don't know if that makes me a coward or I don't know what it makes me." "It makes you the only person in your building who did anything," Garrison said. "Sit down and tell me what's in the file." They sat on the shop steps as the sun came up over the Ozark Hills, and the deputy talked for an hour and 11 minutes. The call had come in at 12:52 p.m. from Tara Vestal, reporting a fall. Kroom had arrived third, behind a sergeant and the volunteer ambulance. By the time he walked through the door, Drake Stovall had already met the sergeant in the driveway and walked him to the barn and shown him the ladder, and there was a rung out of it, freshly out, and there was hay scuffed under it. Drake had been calm and helpful and had said, "He's a wild kid, we've told him 100 times." Tara had said the same words, in the same order, with her hands shaking so hard she couldn't hold a pen. "He staged it," Garrison said. "He staged it before we got there," Kroom said. "That's the part that keeps me up. That's not panic. Panic is a guy screaming that it was an accident. This was a setup. And it took him maybe 15 minutes, and it was good." And I got to thinking, a man doesn't get good at that in one afternoon. "No," Garrison said, "he doesn't. There's one more thing." Kroom turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Your boy was not in that barn. There's no blood in that barn. And your boy's boots were in the bed of Drake's truck, muddy, and the mud didn't match the barn lot. It was gray, kind of blue-gray." Garrison went very still. "Blue-gray. That means something?" "It means clay," Garrison said. "Wet clay out of the bottom of a cut. You don't get that in a barn lot. You get it 8 or 10 feet down." He set his coffee on the step. "Deputy, where was Drake Stovall working yesterday morning?" Kroom took out his phone and looked at nothing on it, the way a man does when he's about to say a thing on purpose. "The county's got him on Phase 3 of the Dovey Creek drainage improvement," he said. "Storm sewer, out past the Bramwell Ridge subdivision. He's been in the ground out there since June." Garrison Vestal stood up. "Deputy Kroom," he said, "you did the right thing calling me. Now I need you to do a harder one. I need you to do absolutely nothing, loudly, where everybody can see you." Reva Purcell lived in a double-wide on 11 acres off Highway K, with a burn barrel in the yard, and her late husband's Kenworth cap still on the hook by the door, 4 years later. She did not want to talk to him. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded and said, "I know who you are, and I know what happened to your boy, and I'm sorry, and I'm not doing this again." "Ma'am," Garrison said, "I'm not here about my son. I'm here about your husband, and I'm here to tell you that the report about how Judd died is wrong, and I think I can prove it." She let him stand there for a good 10 seconds. Then she stepped back from the door. Inside, on the kitchen table, she put down a plastic tote. It had been packed the way people pack things they can't look at, fast, and then never opened. His phone's in there, she said. The company gave it back. I never could get in it. What's the passcode? His mother's birthday. He never had an original thought in his life. God love him. The phone came on and charged, and Garrison sat at that table and went through the last 4 days of a dead man's camera roll while Reva Purcell washed dishes she had already washed because she couldn't watch. There were 19 photos from the job. Jude Purcell had been taking them for a reason. You could tell. They weren't the photos a man takes for fun. They were the photos a man takes because he's building a case for himself and hoping he never needs it. A 9-foot trench with vertical walls in soil that had no business standing vertical. No ladder in the hole. The crew was climbing the excavator bucket. A spoil pile heaped right at the lip. And in 3 of them, in the background, sitting on cribbing 200 feet away at the edge of the job, a clean aluminum trench box that nobody had put in the ground. And the last photo, taken at 7:41 a.m. on the morning he died, was a picture of a piece of paper on a truck hood. Garrison zoomed in. It was a compaction test report, quarrier materials testing, a density result, a moisture content, a technician's initials, and Cy Kendrick's signature as county engineer. Jude Purcell had photographed a test report on the day he died. Mrs. Purcell, Garrison said, and he heard his own voice come out strange. Did Jude ever say anything to you about the tests? Reva turned around with a plate in her hand. He said, she said slowly, that they had him digging the same hole twice. The Tallow County Courthouse Annex has a records room with a counter, a copier that charges $1 a page, and a clerk named Bonnie, who had known Garrison Vestal since he was in 4-H. He spent 2 full days in there. He requested, under the Missouri Sunshine Law, every construction record for the Dovey Creek Drainage Improvement Project, phases 1 through 3, plus the 2 county road projects Stovall had done before it. Bonnie brought him 4 banker's boxes and a chair with a wobble in it. Here is what a man who digs for a living knows that a prosecutor does not. Soil is not one thing. It is a fingerprint. Dovey Creek bottom is silty clay with a plasticity index in the low 20s, and it holds water like a sponge, and it will not compact worth a damn above about 11% moisture. Up on the Bramwell Ridge side, you're into a cherty clay with rock fragments, which behaves like a completely different animal. Drier, stiffer, higher density, less water. 2 soils, 2 personalities, 2 totally different sets of numbers, every time, on every job, in every weather. Garrison built a spreadsheet on the shop computer with 206 rows in it, and by the middle of the second night, he was sitting very still in front of a screen. The compaction results were identical, not similar. Identical. The same dry density values, 118.4, 119.9, cycling in a pattern, in the bottoms and up on the ridge, in June and in November, in a wet year and a dry one, the same moisture contents, 31 test reports across 3 projects that were 4 different soils and 2 different seasons, and the numbers came off a wheel with about a dozen positions on it. Somebody wasn't running tests. Somebody was. Printing. Them. And under every one of them, in the technician line, were the same 3 initials, and then, starting in March of this year, a different set. HY. Garrison sat back in the wobbly chair and looked at those 2 letters for a long time. He picked up the phone and called Quarrier Materials Testing in Lebanon and asked, pleasantly, like a contractor scheduling work, whether a technician with the initials HY was available to come out and run a proctor for him on Thursday. That'd be Heidi, the woman said. Heidi Yeager. Hang on, hun. He hung up before she came back on. Because you do not call a scared 26-year-old at her office. You find out where she eats lunch. Heidi Yeager ate lunch in her car in the parking lot of a Casey's in Lebanon, every day, with the engine running for the air conditioning, which is what people do when the break room is a place where somebody talks to them. Garrison Vestal knocked on her window at 12:20 on a Thursday, holding 2 bottles of water and standing far enough back that she could drive away. She rolled the window down 4 inches. Miss Yeager, my name's Garrison Vestal. I own an excavation company in Kildare. I'm not here to get you in trouble, and I'm not recording you. He held up his phone, powered off, and set it on the roof of her car. I want to ask you one question, and then I'll leave, and if the answer is no, I'll believe you. Okay, she said, in the voice of somebody who has been waiting 9 months for a knock on a window. When you run a compaction test, Garrison said, what happens to the raw sheet? Heidi Yeager stared at him. The field sheet, he said, the one you write on in the dirt with the gauge readings and the pan weights, before anything gets typed up. Where does it go? It goes in the job envelope, she said. It's supposed to stay in the job envelope for 7 years. Is it in the job envelope? She looked out the windshield at a gas pump for about 10 seconds. 26 years old, a state school geology degree, $11 an hour more than she'd made at the feed store, and a boss who signed things. I quit twice, she said, in my head, in the parking lot. Both times I got out of the car and went back in. That's most people, ma'am. That's not a character flaw, that's a car payment. They don't ask me to fake anything, she said, and her voice went thin. That's the part nobody would believe. Nobody ever asked me to write a wrong number. They stopped sending me. Since March, on the Stovall jobs, I get the work order in the morning, and then by 9 it's canceled and reassigned, and then 2 days later, I'll see a report go out with my initials on it for a test I never ran. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, angry about it. I said something in April. My boss told me I must be confusing my jobs, and I am confused. That's the thing. You start to think maybe you did. You didn't, Garrison said. I've got 31 of those reports, and the numbers repeat like a slot machine. You didn't run them because nobody ran them. She put both hands on the steering wheel. What do you want me to do? Nothing loud. He picked his phone off her roof. I want you to go back inside and do your job exactly the way you always do. And I want you to write down, tonight, at home, on paper, every single date you were pulled off a Stovall job, and every date you saw your initials on something you didn't run. Dates and times. Don't email it. Don't put it in the cloud. Put it in a shoebox. That's all? For now. Miss Yeager, one more thing. Are those raw field sheets still in the envelopes for the jobs you did run? Back to 2021? The old ones? Yeah. There's a whole wall of file boxes in the back. Nobody's touched them since. She stopped. Since forever. Okay, Garrison said. Don't touch them either. Don't look at them. Don't photograph them. Don't move them. If somebody ever asks, you never went near them. Why? Because in about 3 weeks, a lawyer's going to walk in there with a subpoena, he said, and I need those boxes to be exactly where they've always been, covered in exactly the same dust. Tara Vestal came to the hospital every day, and every day Garrison sat on the other side of the room and said nothing to her, and on the 5th day she broke. Say it, she said. Orrin was asleep. The blinds were half down. She was 40 pounds of anger inside 130 pounds of woman, and she had not slept in a week. I'm not going to say it, Garrison said. Say it, Garrison. God, say I did this. You didn't do it. I told them he fell. She said it in a whisper that was worse than a scream. I stood in my own driveway, and I told a sheriff's deputy that my son fell off a ladder, and I watched them put him in a helicopter, and I said it. Again. At the desk downstairs. Yes, Garrison said. You did. Then say it. Tara. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. I have been in a room where the wall came in, and a man got hurt, and I have watched 3 grown men decide what happened, out loud, in about 90 seconds, because it was easier than the true thing. Human beings will take any story that lets them keep standing. That's not evil. That's just what we are, and men like Drake know it, and that's the whole trick. He looked up at her. So I'm not going to say it. I'm going to ask you a question instead, and it's the only one that matters. Why was Orrin hurt at all? She started to cry then, the ugly kind. He wasn't supposed to be there, she said. Where? The job, out past Bramwell. She got a breath in. Drake started taking him. In the summer. Orrin loved it. He'd come home talking about the track hoe. He'd talk about it all night, and I thought, her mouth twisted. I thought, good, he's got a man around, since his father's got a unit. Garrison took that one in the chest and let it sit there. Go on. Tuesday morning, Drake took him out, and they came back at 11:30, and Orrin came in the house first, and he wouldn't look at me. And there was already blood on his shirt collar, and Drake came in behind him, and she was shaking now. He was smiling. "Garrison," he said, "tell your mom what a smart boy you are." What did Orrin say? He said, "I told them not to go in the hole." The room was very quiet. Down the hall, a cart went by with a wheel that squeaked. "Say that again," Garrison said, very gently. He said he told them not to go in the hole. He said there was a man down in it, and the dirt was— She pressed her hand over her mouth. He said, "Dad says you can hear it before it goes." He told a grown man's whole crew to get out of a trench, in front of Drake and the men. Listen to him. 2 of them climbed out, because a 12-year-old told them to. Garrison Vestal sat in a vinyl chair in a pediatric trauma unit and understood, finally and completely, what had been done to his son and why. Orrin hadn't been beaten because a violent man lost his temper at a kid. Orrin had been beaten because he had stood at the lip of a Stovall trench and repeated, in front of witnesses, the exact sentence that would eventually put Drake Stovall in prison, and Drake had known it in his bones. It was not rage, it was maintenance. It was the same thing as writing a report before the ambulance arrives, done with hands instead of a pen. He had made an example out of a 12-year-old so that the men who had climbed out of that trench would understand what happens to people who say things at his job sites. "Tara," Garrison said, "where was he hurt? Was it the barn?" "No," she said it barely out loud. "It was in the truck, in the driveway. He made him sit in the truck first." "And whose idea was the hayloft?" "His." She looked up. "He had it before we got to the house. He said it to me in the kitchen, while Orrin was in the bathroom. He said, 'Kid came off the loft ladder. That rung's been loose all year, and if you say anything else, Tara, they take him from.'" "Both." "Some of us." Garrison stood up. "I need you to do something, and you are not going to want to." "I'll do anything." "You're going to keep saying it," he said. She looked at him like he'd hit her. "For 8 more days," Garrison said. "You keep the story. You go home to that house. You let him think it held. Because the second he thinks it didn't, the men who climbed out of that trench start getting visits, and Miss Yeager's file boxes catch fire, and my son becomes a boy who changed his story, and juries hate a boy who changed his story." He crouched down so he was under her eye line, the way you talk to somebody who's about to run. 8 days, then you're going to tell it once, on the record, to a prosecutor, with your father sitting next to you, and you're never going to have to say the other thing again for the rest of your life. "My father hasn't spoken to me since March." "Your father's been in my shop every night this week," Garrison said. "Carl runs the grader on Route P at 4 in the morning, so nobody sees him crying about it. Call him. Here is how a combat engineer takes a man apart. He does not attack the man. He attacks the ground the man is standing on, and then he stands back and lets gravity do what gravity does." Garrison Vestal spent the next 6 days building the most careful thing he had ever built in his life, and he built it out of public documents, borrowed equipment, an old man's grader, a dead man's phone, and the single most dangerous force in a small county, a scheduled meeting. 1. He filed a written citizen complaint with the Missouri On-Site Safety and Health Consultation Program and, when that got him a form letter, drove to the OSHA area office in Springfield and sat in the lobby for 4 hours until a compliance officer named Jules Lovelace came out to make him leave and instead sat down. Garrison put 19 photographs from Jude Purcell's phone on the table in date order. He put the trench box in the yard next to the trench box on the cribbing. Lovelace looked at photograph 11 for a long time and said, "Sir, who else has these?" And Garrison said, "As of 8 minutes ago, you do." 2. He drove to Jefferson City and walked into the State Highway Department's district office with his spreadsheet, because 2 of the 3 Dovey Creek phases had been built with state cost-share money, and state cost-share money comes with a state geotechnical engineer named Austin Souter, who has a very particular kind of anger about fabricated density reports. Souter read 4 pages and got up and shut his own office door. "You know what this is," Souter said. "I know what it looks like from a backhoe seat. It's 31 instances of a document fraud against the state of Missouri, is what it is. Souter took his glasses off. Mr. Vestal, understand me. Nobody indicts anybody over a spreadsheet. I can get excited about paper all day long and a jury will fall asleep. What actually moves is when we open the ground and it does not match the paper. Garrison Vestal smiled for the first time in 11 days. Sir, he said, that's why I came to you. 3. He went and found Glenn Rathbone. Rathbone was 47 and had been Stovall's foreman for 9 years and was drinking his lunch at a bar in Kildare called the Ridgeline, alone, at 1 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, which told Garrison most of what he needed. He sat down 2 stools away and ordered a Coke and said nothing for 11 minutes. Then he laid a single sheet of paper on the bar and slid it down. It was the 2021 finding on the death of Jude Purcell. Employee entered an unshored excavation contrary to direct instruction. And at the bottom, on the line that said, Supervisor Statement. Signature. G. Rathbone. I didn't write that, Rathbone said immediately. I know, Garrison said. I didn't. Rathbone's hand was shaking around the glass. They put it in front of me in the office with Hoyle standing there, and they said sign it, or the company goes under and 30 guys lose. Glenn. Garrison turned to look at him. I know you didn't write it. Here's what I came to tell you. Every single thing that has happened in the last 4 years has been arranged so that when it finally comes apart, the man holding the bag is you. You're the supervisor of record. Your signature is on the instruction that killed Jude. Your name is on the daily reports for a trench with no ladder. When the state comes, and Glenn, the state is coming, Drake Stovall will stand in a room with a lawyer and say, my foreman ran that site, I was in the office, and he will not even blink, and you will do 9 years. Glenn Rathbone put his head down on the bar. I've got a boy in the Marines, he said. Then be a man he can visit, Garrison said. There's a woman named Lana Bledsoe at the prosecutor's office. She's got an appointment slot Thursday at 10. It's already under your name. 4. And then, on the last 3 nights, Garrison Vestal did the part that would have gotten him arrested if anybody had ever asked the right question. He borrowed a ground-penetrating radar cart from a survey buddy in Rolla. He borrowed Carl Hargis, and Carl Hargis borrowed nothing at all, because a man who has run a road grader in a county for 31 years does not need permission to be standing in a right-of-way at 2 in the morning. They walked the Dovey Creek storm sewer alignment, public right-of-way, every foot of it, pushing a radar cart in the dark over the fresh backfill of phases 1, 2, and 3, and Garrison watched the screen, and what he saw made him stop walking 3 separate times. Because compacted trench backfill returns a certain way. It's dense, it's uniform, it's boring. That's what good work looks like on a screen. Boring. What came back off 2,000 feet of Drake Stovall's trenches was not boring. It was loud. Voids. Big irregular hyperbolas at 4 and 6 feet where there should have been nothing but tight lifts of soil. Something long and hard buried at 7 feet in a place where the drawings showed nothing. Garrison stood on a gravel shoulder at 2:40 in the morning and looked at a screen and started laughing, quietly, in a way that made Carl Hargis take a step back. What? Carl said. He didn't haul the spoil off, Garrison said. For 3 years. Every trench, every job. He dug a hole and he put the same wet junk right back in it. Rock, stumps, busted pipe, whatever was in the way, and he never compacted a lift of it. And then he had a lab print him a piece of paper that said 118.4. So? Garrison turned the screen so the old man could see the black and white ghosts of it. So there are 200 houses up on Bramwell Ridge, he said, draining into a storm sewer that's sitting on a sponge, and in about 4 minutes on the right morning, I can make the state of Missouri watch it come apart. He marked 3 spots with survey lath and orange paint. He wrote the coordinates in a field book. Then he drove home and slept for 5 hours, which was 4 more than he'd had all week, and on Friday morning he made 2 phone calls. The first was to Austin Souter at the state, to confirm that the Phase 3 final acceptance inspection, the one where the state signs off and releases the money, was still scheduled for Monday at 9. The second was to the Tallow County clerk to sign up for the 3 minutes of public comment at the county commission meeting, which by law, in Missouri, in that county, in that building, convened Monday morning at 9 as well. Same morning, 2 rooms, 11 miles apart. Garrison Vestal hung up the phone and looked at the calendar on his shop wall. Monday, he said. Monday came in clear and 81 degrees with a wind out of the southwest. At 8:52 a.m., 4 vehicles were parked on the shoulder of Dovey Creek Road at the Phase 3 terminus. A white State Highway Department pickup, a gray federal sedan, a Tallow County engineer's Blazer, and Drake Stovall's black 1-ton with the gold logo on the door. Austin Souter had his clipboard. Jules Lovelace, from OSHA, had a camera on a strap, and the particular stillness of a man who has been on a lot of sites where somebody died. Cy Kendrick, the county engineer, kept checking his phone and did not appear to have blinked in some time. And Drake Stovall was doing what Drake Stovall did, which was be the best thing in Tallow County, shaking hands, laughing, telling Souter about a smallmouth he'd caught below the low-water bridge. Garrison Vestal was standing 40 feet away in a clean Carhartt shirt with his hands in his pockets. Drake saw him and something moved behind the hansom. "Help you?" "Public right-of-way," Garrison said pleasantly. "You got a lot of nerve, Vestal, considering." Drake turned to Souter with a small, sorry smile. "That's the one I told you about. Boy's been through a family thing. Kid got hurt. It's a shame." "Mr. Stovall," Austin Souter said, without looking up from his clipboard, "I'm here to observe 3 test pits at stations selected by the department, in accordance with the cost-share agreement your county signed. Your excavator's here?" "He's here, but I've got to say, Austin, that's a little unusual. It's Section 9C. Souter handed him the page. "Unusual is Section 11. Let's do 9C. The trackhoe walked up the shoulder, and Glenn Rathbone climbed down out of it, and did not look at Drake Stovall even one time, and Drake noticed that, and Garrison watched him notice it. The first test pit went in at Station 21+40, right on top of a survey lath with orange paint on it that nobody asked about. At 3 feet, the bucket came up with wet gray clay in it in clods the size of footballs. At 4.5 feet, it came up with a stump. Nobody said anything for a second. It was a hedge stump, about 18 inches across, root ball and all, buried 4.5 feet under a county storm sewer trench. Jules Lovelace took a photograph. At 5 feet, the wall of the test pit, the wall of backfill. 3 years old, on a completed and accepted county project, sloughed off on its own, a whole slab of it, and fell into the bottom of the hole with a sound like a wet phone book hitting a floor. Austin Souter wrote for 11 seconds without stopping. "Station 21+40, he said. Test pit 1. Uncompacted heterogeneous fill with organic inclusions to a depth of at least 5 feet. Cy, what's the density report say for this station?" Cy Kendrick, county engineer, 29 years of service, looked at a piece of paper in his hand and said, in a voice like a screen door, 118.4. "Read me the moisture." 11.2. "Read me the next station." 118.4. "And the one after that." Cy Kendrick put the paper down on the hood of the Blazer. "I'd like to call somebody," he said. Test pit 2, at station 34+10, produced 11 feet of pipe, a shattered section of 48-inch corrugated metal that had been in the way of the alignment and had been dropped back in the trench instead of hauled off, resting at 7 feet directly beneath the new storm sewer. Test pit 3 did not have to be dug because by then, Drake Stovall was shouting. It had come on him gradually and then all at once. He had started reasonable. "Settlement happens. That's an old stump from the fence line. Austin, you know how it is out here." And then he had gotten loud. And then he had made the mistake that men like Drake Stovall always make, which is that he could not stand to be the only person on a job site who was not in charge of it. This is ridiculous. He threw his arm at the hole. You dig a test pit in a wet bottom in August and act surprised it's soft? That ground's fine. That ground'll hold a loaded truck. It'd hold this whole road. Mr. Stovall. No, You know what? You want to see? And Drake Stovall walked to the edge of the first test pit, 9 feet by then, walls vertical, no bench, no slope, no shoring, a spoil pile heaped at the lip, and he pointed down into it. You want to see how good that is? Come here. Come look at the bottom of that. There's not a thing wrong with. And he went down the excavator bucket into the hole, to prove it. 2 things happened in the next 8 seconds. Jules Lovelace from OSHA said, very loudly and very calmly, Sir, do not enter that excavation. And Garrison Vestal took his hands out of his pockets. He had been standing 40 feet away for an hour and 11 minutes, and he had not moved, and he had not spoken. And now he crossed the ground faster than a man his age has any business moving. And he got to the lip of that pit, and he stopped, and he did not go in. He put his hand flat on the wall at the top. Cool. Get out, he said. Drake Stovall looked up at him from 9 feet down, and he grinned, because he thought this was the moment he won. You want to come down here and make me? The north wall is going to fail, Garrison said. It's already gone. Look at your boots. Drake Stovall looked down. There was a thin drift of soil at the base of the north wall, maybe an inch of it, feathered out over his boot toes like sand off a dune. The wall above it had developed a crack you could put a dime in, running about 6 feet, and it was open a little more than it had been 4 seconds ago. That is what the ground does before it kills you. It whispers first. It has always whispered first. Almost nobody knows the word. Ladder, Garrison said, to nobody, and Glenn Rathbone was already running with it. They got the ladder down, and Drake Stovall got 2 rungs up it when the north wall came in. It did not come in like a movie. It came in like a filing cabinet falling over. One enormous slab, 4 feet by 9, maybe 5,000 pounds of tallow county, that let go all at once and hit the bottom of the pit and took Drake Stovall's legs out from under him to the hips. He screamed. It was a completely different sound than his laugh. And Garrison Vestal, who 11 days earlier had sat outside a green gate at 1 in the morning with a pry bar on the seat beside him, put his knees on the lip of that hole and reached down and got 2 fists in the man's shirt. Rathbone, hand shovels, no machine, do not put that bucket in this hole. Lovelace, call it. Souter, get on that wall with plywood. No. There. The crack. Put your weight on the plywood. It took 11 minutes to get Drake Stovall out of that trench, and Garrison Vestal ran all 11 of them, on his belly at the edge, in the dirt, with his hands, while a federal compliance officer filmed the entire thing on a phone because the man had the presence of mind to know that this was going to matter later. They pulled him out at 10:41. Broken pelvis, broken left femur, crush injury to both lower legs, and alive, completely, screamingly alive, because a man he had put in the hospital 11 days earlier had refused to let him die. At 10:44, sitting on the shoulder of Dovey Creek Road with his hands shaking and clay to his elbows, Garrison Vestal looked up at Austin Souter. Mr. Souter, he said, for your record, there was no shoring on this site. No, sir, there was not. And the trench box is in his yard. Where is his yard? 1140 Dovey Creek Road, Garrison said. Green Gate. At 9:04 that same morning, 11 miles away in the Tallow County Courthouse, Presiding Commissioner Hoyle Stovall had gavelled the commission meeting into session and moved directly to public comment, because his brother had told him that the Vestal man had signed up, and it would look better to let him rant for 3 minutes and be done with it. Except Garrison Vestal was not there. Reva Purcell was. She walked to the little podium with a manila envelope, and she was so nervous she had to hold it with both hands, and she said, My name is Reva Purcell. My husband Jude died in one of Drake Stovall's trenches on October the 9th, 2021, and this county told me he did it to himself. And then she read, out loud, into the minutes, the 19 timestamps off her husband's phone. Behind her in the gallery sat Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Lana Bledsoe, who had spent the previous Thursday morning with Glenn Rathbone and the previous Friday afternoon with a woman named Heidi Yeager and a shoebox, and who was, at that moment, sitting on a subpoena for a wall of dusty file boxes in Lebanon that nobody had touched since forever. And in the third row in a green dress, with her father Carl beside her holding his cap in his hands, sat Tara Vestal, who had 8 days of the worst acting of her life behind her, and one true sentence left to say. Hoyle Stovall's phone started buzzing at 9:41 and did not stop. Here is what happened to everyone, which is the part I know you want. Drake Stovall spent 5 weeks in the hospital and came out of it in a wheelchair for a year, and then on a cane, and then with a limp that the physical therapist said would be permanent. He was charged in Tallow County with felony assault in the first degree on a child, endangering the welfare of a child, and 8 counts of forgery relating to construction test reports, and he was charged in federal court on the state cost-share money. The manslaughter case for Judd Purcell was reopened in November. Glenn Rathbone testified for 2 days. Heidi Yeager's shoebox turned into 40 pages of exhibits, and the file boxes turned into 400 more, because the raw field sheets, the actual dirty pieces of paper from the actual holes, existed only for the tests that had actually been run, and for 31 reports there was simply nothing behind them at all. A report with no field sheet behind it is not a document, it's a costume. Drake Stovall pled, eventually, to avoid the federal trial. 19 years. Hoyle Stovall resigned as presiding commissioner on a Tuesday, citing his health, and was indicted 11 weeks later for a bid-rigging arrangement that was, in the end, embarrassingly cheap. A man had sold an entire county's ground for about what a good bass boat costs. Cy Kendrick, the county engineer, took a plea and cooperated and lost his professional license and his pension, and Garrison Vestal, asked about him by a reporter, said only, "He signed things. Nobody made him. That's the whole job." 206 homes in the Bramwell Ridge subdivision were placed on a state remediation list. The storm sewer was rebuilt over 14 months. It cost 4 times what the original had, which is the actual price of the original, delivered late. Deputy Walt Kroom was called before an internal review board for the call he made from his cruiser on that August afternoon. He told the truth about all of it. He was suspended for 11 days without pay, and then, 5 months later, he was the deputy who got assigned to the Tallow County School Resource Officer post, which is where he is now, and where the kids call him Kroomy, and where he has, twice, driven a child to a hospital and stood in the hallway and made absolutely certain that what got written down was what actually happened. Reva Purcell got a corrected finding, on state letterhead, that removed the sentence. Contrary to direct instruction. From her husband's death, she keeps it in a frame in the hallway next to the Kenworth cap. She says she doesn't look at it. She says she just likes it being there. Tara and Garrison did not get back together because that is not how this works. They got something harder and more useful. They got honest. She testified. She did the 11 months of court-ordered parenting classes without complaining about it one time. Orrin lives with his father now at the house on Route P, and he is with his mother every Wednesday and every other weekend, and they are, slowly, building whatever the true version of them is going to be. Orrin Vestal had 4 surgeries. He has a titanium plate along the left orbital rim and a scar through his eyebrow he is extremely proud of, and he has, since that August, developed a habit that his father did not teach him and cannot break him of, which is that whenever an adult tells him what happened, he writes down the time. And in April, on 11 acres off Highway K, Garrison Vestal took his son out to set a survey monument for Reva Purcell. A real one, a brass cap in a concrete collar, marking the corner she'd been arguing with the neighbor about for years. Orrin held the rod. Garrison ran the level. It took 40 minutes. When they'd set the cap and troweled it flat, the boy stood up and looked at it, and he said, "That's gonna be here forever, right?" "Longer than us," his father said. "How do people know it's right, though?" Orrin said. "Like, in 100 years. How do they know somebody didn't just put it there?" Garrison Vestal looked at his son for a second. Then he crouched down and opened his field book, and he wrote the date and the coordinates and the temperature and the 2 of their names, and he turned it around so the boy could see it. "They don't," he said. "That's the whole thing, bud. They can't. All anybody ever gets is what somebody wrote down, and whether that person was the kind of person who tells the truth when nobody's checking." He clicked the pen and put it in his pocket. "So that's the only real job there is. Everything else is just dirt." So that's Garrison Vestal, and honestly, I've been chewing on this one for a while. Because here's what got me. The moment that decided this entire story wasn't the trench. It wasn't the county meeting, or the test pits, or the man getting pulled out of the hole. It was a nurse in a hallway in Springfield, writing down, in quotation marks, with a time on it, what a 12-year-old kept saying while he was half conscious. I'll say I fell. That's it. That's the whole case. One person, doing the most boring part of her job correctly, on a day when nobody was watching her, and nobody would ever have known. And I think that's the thing worth taking out of this. We have this idea that evil gets stopped by somebody big and brave showing up at the end. It doesn't. It gets stopped, almost every single time, by some ordinary person a long way back who wrote down what actually happened instead of what was easier. A nurse's note, a foreman who kept a copy, a dead man taking 19 photos on his phone because he had a bad feeling. The other half of it is uglier, and I want to say it plainly. Drake Stovall was not scary because he was violent. He was scary because he understood that the first explanation of an event becomes the event. He got to the story before anybody else did, every single time. At the job site, in the driveway, in the kitchen while the kid was in the bathroom. He didn't hide the body. He just wrote down that it wasn't there. And it worked for years, on grown adults, on a sheriff's department, on a county. So if you take one thing from this, when something bad happens to you or to somebody you love, take care of the person first, obviously. But the second thing, the very next thing, is the record, times, photographs, your own words in your own handwriting, that day, before anybody helpful arrives to explain what you saw. Because you will be shocked how fast a room full of reasonable people will agree on a story that lets everybody go home. And the last thing, that deputy, 29 years old, mother on dialysis, gave a man an address and a green gate. I've thought about him a lot. He handed a father a loaded weapon and walked away. And it is only luck and Garrison Vestal's character that it didn't end with 2 ruined families instead of 1 ruined man. But he also did the one thing nobody else in that building would do, which was refuse to let it be quiet. I don't know what to call that. I just know the ground doesn't care what we call it. The ground only knows whether somebody listened early or listened late. Thanks for hanging out with me. Take care of yourselves out there.